So let's move on. It's actually, believe it or not, and I was pretty surprised by this, the 5-year anniversary of the beginning of the Me Too movement, which started in early October of 2017 when the New York Times dropped its report, its investigation into the allegations against Harvey Weinstein. And that then launched the entire movement. It became a snowball careening down the hill and really, in my opinion, got completely out of control, but leaves a very interesting legacy behind. The New York Times, we have this element to put up on the screen, did a very long reflective piece on it by reporters who wrote some of that excellent journalism about Harvey Weinstein. The Harvey Weinstein story was the story of a lot of Me Too, Ryan, which was also crucially a media story. It was about how he had bought off and charmed the media into silencing these stories for years.
And bullied. Yeah, and a good amount of bullying, too.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't like total complicity from the media. There was some of that if you look at what happened at NBC, according to Ronan Farrow's reporting. But he was like completely bullying people. There's a story, someone wrote about it in The Cut. I forget who wrote about it in The Cut. It was a great story about how at a party in the 90s or in the early aughts, Harvey Weinstein took somebody's camera when they photographed him having a meltdown on a sidewalk outside a book party. And I think it was Rebecca Traister. Rebecca Traister wrote about this. And the photo never got published, but it's out there somewhere, presumably. So all that is to say, Ryan, it seemed to go off the rails in that January with the Aziz Ansari story. That was a really big turning point in the Me Too movement. I think everybody...
That was really early, too.
Yeah, that was a
couple months in.
A couple months in, yeah, a few months in, but a lot of heads had rolled by that time, and some for good reason, but it was a frenzy. I have never seen anything like it before, and I'm curious for what your take was on it. I think there was a lot of good, especially in the early days that came of the Me Too movement. There's a lot of necessary corrections that were happening. But at the same time, by the time, the Aziz Ansari story rolls around, it was like really low-level gossip was getting traded as, much trafficked as like much more serious, and that as though it deserved a place in this pantheon of great Me Too reporting, when it didn't deserve to even see the light of day.
The Aziz Ansari moment was an interesting one because it was reported by, if I'm remembering the name, it was Babe.net.
Yeah, Babe.net.
Babe.net. Nobody had heard of Babe.net before, nor since.
Babe.net. It's not around anymore, but I used to regularly check Babe.net because
you were a hipster?
Hilarious.
You were a Babe.net hipster?
No, but after I became aware of the existence of Babe.net, they bragged in a piece after the Aziz story dropped, they bragged in a piece about how they were editing it at brunch. They were editing, they had like a mimosa in one hand and their laptop in the other, and they were editing the story about accusing a man of sexual assault, which is what was in the Aziz Ansari story.
They never really...
Yeah, they did,
sort
though.
Of, yeah.
It says sexual assault in the story. And so it's...
They just didn't put anything in there that would back that up.
Well, that's the thing, right? And so like powerful people, powerful men need to be held to account. There's no question about that. And journalists are the ones who should do it. But the standard for what became publishable allegations, I think, lowered. And then when that happened, people realized, some of the allegations that came out against Brett Kavanaugh in the New Yorker, that Michael Avenatti was trafficking in, there was no proof. The Julie Swetnick stuff, you had Julie Swetnick's word and no other proof than that Brett Kavanaugh was a gang rapist. They aired that on
NBC, I think.
Yeah.
They aired that interview live on not live, but taped on NBC. And that was to me even, that was a more seminal moment than the Aziz Ansari divide. Absolutely. Even because it was like, because her story just literally didn't add up.
Right.
You're like, okay, what's your birthday? All right, you're saying you were at this senior week down in Ocean City. You would have been like 23 or something, like whatever. You can look up the number. It just didn't square. Like the basic facts in the same way that the University of Virginia story that Rolling Stone wrote about, the basic facts. You're like, okay, this is all awful, but then you're like, what, was there a party this night? And then these are like basic facts that you can ascertain. It turns out there wasn't. Now I think that and so the Time story, I think, is worth reading. And there was another one, maybe it was in Fortune, I forget where, that asked the question of whether or not the kind of cancellations or the consequences, the punishments that have been doled out to so many as a result of Me Too were sticking, because there's a sense among a lot of people that they're not, that you face 20 minutes of kind of, or you get your 15 minutes of infamy, and then you recover. And people point to Louis C.K. and others. This piece went through, and the Times mentions it as well. These, on a case-by-case basis, actually, Louis C.K. was a massively dominant figure in our pop culture. Yeah. Now he's just kind of doing direct-to-consumer stuff. He won
successfully.
He won an award, an Emmy recently, but that's nowhere near where he was. As the Times and others point out, he's not directing films. He's not where he was, and so I think that people who are huge fans of Me Too underestimate some of its impact.
Backlash.
Now, I think like the goal of the movement to create a world where women can walk around freely in society without fear of being harassed, or not without fear, but with less of a chance of being harassed, and particularly without being assaulted, required a radical kind of shakeup. Like I don't think there was any way that you were going to go from where we were to a place where of more gender equity without a massive kind of shakeup of society. And so when you're going to do that, you're going to people are going to get picked up unfairly along the way. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs would be, and some of the innocent people caught up are the eggs that were probably broken to make that omelet. And again, none of that is a judgment. That's just a kind of observation of the way that the phenomenon kind of had to unfold if you're going to really strike back against it. Now, if you go too far and break too many innocent eggs, then you're going to produce your own backlash, and you're going to be right back where you started to be at the beginning.
One thing that I've thought about a lot during Me Too is how women's mass participation in the workforce, and especially in jobs that are really similar to men, right? So like to participate in the workforce right now, it's not like, for the most part, you don't have to be doing manual labor, and there are jobs that men and women can do with the same ease that are just, at cubicle jobs, whatever it is, a job like this, for instance, it's women are mass participating in the workforce in a way that didn't really start happening until the last roughly half century.
Right.
After women were going to college in larger numbers. And listen, I'm glad. I think that's great. I'm here. But I also think we didn't iron out. We thought things were going much more smoothly, or we had expectations that things had gone much more smoothly. And Me Too really gave women an opportunity to say, actually, no, when I am just trying to do my job, and when I am trying to participate in my job, for instance, by going to a happy hour so I don't miss out, then yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem if my boss wants to take me to, my older married male boss wants to take me to dinner at a restaurant alone to talk about my future and do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, that stuff is problematic. And I think it was important to, as they say, have that conversation.
Right.
All that is to say, though, this was already happening on college campuses with during the Obama administration, the terrible Title IX reforms that the Obama administration had done, which thrust college campuses, and I know because I was on one at the time, into chaos. And it made a lot of men feel like what we were talking about last week. I did a monologue on this. A lot of men, over what was 50-something% of single men are too afraid of being perceived as creepy to talk to women. And that, I think I said last week that in some ways that was irrational. What I meant by that is women actually do want to be talked to, but it's not that sort of level of fear post Me Too. I don't know that it is entirely irrational, because there were a lot of instances that I think kind of had a chilling effect on sexual politics in this country. And I don't know where it goes from here. COVID changed everything in ways, everything about the workplace, everything about dating. And so we're kind of in a totally different direction now anyway.
Yeah, and I don't know if we'll find a balance because it's hard to know or whether the pendulum just keeps swinging back and forth. But I think you're right to identify the female surge into the workforce, and particularly women have been graduating from college and from graduate schools at higher rates.
Yep.
And also because of the way that the patriarchy, you could call it, has allowed men to enjoy kind of like high-level jobs, while women have been forced, prior to this, into kind of lower-level organizational positions. Women came out of with higher graduation rates in both undergrad and grad, but also with better organizational skills because of the kind of cultural the cultural window that we had given to men to just let women do things for them. And so they're coming into the workforce oftentimes just better equipped to do the work. And I think sexual harassment and in some cases sexual violence became a way to try to enforce, reinforce, reproduce that kind of male dominance that men felt threatened by. Now, I don't think they were doing that consciously necessarily, though some might have been.
It's interesting in the era of the sort of trans conversation about Title IX that the right is reflexively sort of defensive of Title IX now. But the conversation about Title IX up until about 2015 or 2016 actually, was basically that Title IX had cost men some opportunities in sports. And whether or not you think Title IX was a net benefit or a net negative, whatever it is, that was a huge part of the conversation. And it's an example of how women also have been set up for success in ways that recently, we talked about Richard Reeves, Stogger and Crystal had him on the show actually. Men are struggling in the society in some ways because as a correction, we redesigned our education system and we redesigned society in ways that would lift women. But what we didn't see happening is that it would be at the expense of men, and at the expense of men, in some ways, that's also the expense of women. You can't have one side sort of fall and the other stay. It hurts everyone at the same time, and I really do feel like some of those changes were probably at the cost of men, which is ultimately at the cost of women too.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.